Hi, it's Dave Michels, and welcome to another Talking Points video. Today we're going to be talking about video, actually. We're going to be talking about video in a Talking Points video. We're going to be talking specifically about the Gartner Magic Quadrant report that came out recently. Magic Quadrant for Group Video Systems, published July 15th by Robert Mason and Tom Eagle. And I've got with me a couple of esteemed video experts. Or actually, but I guess you're still experts, but formerly video esteemed experts. How's that? So I've got two esteemed experts with me. I'll introduce you briefly, then we'll turn it over. But let's see, we've got Simon Dudley, who is formerly with Life Science. I want you to say hi so we can get you that video on you for a second.
Yeah, hi, Dave. Thanks for getting me involved. Looking forward to it.
Very good. And we've also got Marty Hollander, who is formerly associated with video. And the reason I asked both of these people, I'll get to you in just a second, Marty, because I'm going to turn it over to you. The reason I asked both of you to be involved is because you both have extensive video background and you are technically unbiased, although I know that bias doesn't often end, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively, just because you no longer work with somebody. But we're going to be talking about this report in general. And so let me start off with Mr. Hollander and go to you, Marty, and ask you specifically, when you saw this report, what was your first reactions before we get into more details? Go ahead, Marty.
Thank you, Dave. And so let me first state that I had been associated with video and managed their submission to this Magic Quadrant report. So I have a bias. I've been.
You have a bias in favor or against?
Well, you'll probably see in this discussion, I have an understanding of where Gartner is coming from, because I participated.
Well, that makes one of us. That makes one of us.
Yeah, and so I'll probably have that role. Not that I want to take the role that I got to defend Gartner, but I probably will have that bias more than either of you, because I participated in this and had a motivation for why I wanted video to succeed. And so just to be fair to everyone, that's where I'm coming from. Now, when the first thing I did when I saw the questionnaire from Gartner about this report, I said, gee, it's about group video systems.
Yeah, let me just stop you there for a second. Let me just stop you there for a second, Marty. I just want to briefly explain the way Gartner does these reports. Okay. Gartner effectively puts out, I would say, kind of like an RFQ, or Marty used the term questionnaire, and they send that to all the vendors that they intend to include. And it's a fairly detailed set of questions. They don't actually reveal, they reveal at a very high level. They don't reveal in detail what they're really looking for or the specifics of what they're looking for. They do it at a very high level, and they don't really reveal what put, if you look at the actual quadrants, there's no scores there's no scores. And you really can't compare these to previous years. I think this is the first year they did this particular report, but you can't compare them to previous years, because the importance of a Magic Quadrant isn't about where a company ends up on it, but where it ends up on it in relation to other companies. And it's sometimes a little hard to understand what drove that. They give us high-level clues, but go ahead. I'm sorry, just want to answer that question.
I don't disagree with what you said, but there actually is a history. So prior to this Magic Quadrant, Gartner had been doing what are called market scopes, and it's the same sort of thing, but there is no two dimensions. There's just one dimension, and it's a very simple scoring scheme, and then they do write-ups. So the amount of information that you provide Gartner, including references, who they call, is extensive. And then when you read the report, it's this little summary. So I think as I went through this thinking process, Dave, knowing that we were going to talk about it, I stepped back and I said, what really is the objective of what Gartner is doing? And maybe if we provide that context, it helps us. So why is Gartner even doing a Magic Quadrant, right? You look at it and you say, Gartner's got a huge client base, but their client base is not the average customer, right? Their clients tend to be mid-sized to very large organizations, not just enterprises, governments, universities, etc. And what they're doing here is they consolidate a year's worth or more of the kinds of inquiries they get on this topic, combined with what vendors have been telling them over this time frame, and they structure some sort of analysis for which they gather a huge amount of data. Think of it as future background information for which they can use to advise their clients going forward on other inquiries. And they create this matrix for a particular purpose. I don't want to hog this. I can certainly go into more detail, but there is a context for why they do it, and it's more of a process and a system that they have rather than this report just stands on its own.
Yeah, and I want to I want to echo something you said there. It really is very much biased, their process, toward a large enterprise audience, and you can see that. There's points in here that come out that say that very clearly. It's probably okay in the context of historical context of video systems, because that was a fairly significant enterprise play. But one of the things that we're seeing, and I'm sure Simon's going to talk about, is the democratization of video and how it's becoming readily available to so many people. And I think that's why this report is so interesting. It's not just this report. It's also I've got right here, right in front of me, the UCAS UC as a Service report from 2014. The 2015 hasn't come out yet, and in this one, that segment that's adopting UCAS tends to be SMB, and they're looking at it with enterprise glasses, and I think that there's some discrepancies that come out because of that. But okay, so why don't you wrap up your point there, and then we'll get to Simon here and see what his thoughts were. But go ahead. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Well, I think I'll come. I have plenty of things to add,
okay,
but we'll do it as we go on. Let's give Simon an opportunity here.
Okay, Simon. So what was your first take when you saw this finished report?
The easiest answer would be like someone talking about what the best wooden wheels are in about 1950. It's irrelevant. The days of a physical endpoint in a meeting room are basically over. I mean, it's not entirely true, but the vast majority of the market is measuring something entirely different than the quality of an endpoint. And you've got an 8-way MCU, and I've got a 12-way MCU, and you do 1080/60. And I mean, users are just moving away from that like crazy. It's irrelevant.
Okay,
it doesn't matter anymore.
I know where you're going, but I think from a external point of view, anyone watching this, I think you went right to the cart and skipped the horse there, because the report is titled Group Video. And we just said video is democratizing and becoming everywhere. So,
sure.
So what is the gap that you're referring to specifically?
Well, the gap is that what customers care about now is a solution to a problem, and the problem is increasingly being solved by service in the sky type options.
Okay, so basically, what I wanted you to say, and I know we're in agreement on this, is that the report put a little too much emphasis on the actual room system hardware. Is your point?
Yeah, it's the end of the line. It's the bit that matters least. I mean, it's funny, isn't it, that Logitech just announced this week a new senior executive to talk about selling devices, their AV devices that plug into some software application that will fill all these rooms up. The days of selling hardware video conferencing endpoints is over. It's wooden wheels in an era of mass transport using steel wheels and rubber tires.
Yeah, there's a very large discrepancy, and I completely agree with you. If you look at the inclusion criteria to actually be included in this report, it said very clearly it is, where is it, that the company must provide visibility as evidenced by having realized more than $10 million in direct video endpoint revenue in 2014. So they're focusing on companies that are selling a lot of endpoints, and your point specifically is that's the wrong thing to be focusing on.
Completely. It makes no sense at all.
Yeah.
I'm not certain even if I was, I understand, and I do agree with Marty's point, right, that Gartner is playing a different game here. They're playing a long game. They're getting a lot of information together, but I think they're measuring the wrong axis. I mean, what happens is when businesses go through these business process extinction events, accession events, then you end up with a bunch of people who are measuring things by the wrong axis. It's like the year after the iPhone coming out, and then someone goes and does a talk about how the keypad on a Nokia phone is better than the Motorola phone. It doesn't matter anymore.
So
The success criteria has changed.
So that's the I can't agree with you more. So let me vehemently agree with you here, because the issue is that every video conference has to have a endpoint, but right now, for example, I'm on my generic PC as my endpoint, and so I didn't obtain this endpoint from a video conferencing vendor. And many video conferencing vendors realize this. In fact, pretty much all of them do. And they're actively selling software and stuff like that. But that's not what's driving this report. This report is driving very specific appliance-like hardware that goes into a video room. There's different kinds of video rooms. And the first thing that this report talks about, it talks about dedicated room systems, modular room systems, personal video endpoints. And in the very first paragraph, dedicated video room systems, I highlighted it, this sentence: customer interest in this segment has declined as enterprises seek more affordable and more flexible solutions. But yet that's what's really driving $10 million in revenue, is this expensive dedicated video room system. Well,
you could argue, right, by that definition, why isn't Logitech in this list? I mean, Logitech, I mean, yes, it's not a dedicated piece of hardware, but they sell well over $10 million worth of cameras, microphones, speakers, all the stuff that actually people are building video rooms around now.
Right.
So let me jump in before you two guys just sort of talk each other into total agreement. It is very important to look at the title. It isn't saying this is everything you want to know about video conferencing. It is about group video systems. And if you go down that report, and I can tell you, by the way, when Video submitted, Video did not feel that their room systems are, hands down the best over anybody, and let's just do this. We took the approach that it really is about more than it. So I'm in agreement with you, but I do want to say you got to be careful before you totally say the report doesn't make any sense because it missed the mark. When Gartner looks at things, they look at what people have, what people are asking for, and where it's going. And if you notice, they talk about other things. Personal video endpoints and infrastructure also play a part in how this report is rated. It is not solely on, let's just look at your room system. And then the next thing is, you have to recognize that Gartner, unlike other analysts, is not about, let me get my hands on, like, let's take Wayne House as an example, who will do an analysis of a particular room system or set of room systems. Gartner doesn't do that. They sort of take their customers' assessment. They don't have their own lab. So what they're looking at here, they
pride themselves on that. They say we have,
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why I think you have to be careful to say, oh, it's just about room systems. I think room systems were a minimum criteria, but they've left themselves open, I think, in a very good way to say it's about infrastructure. I mean, you read that report, there's a lot of stuff in there and weighing about infrastructure. It does talk about services, but doesn't give them the weight that you might say. And it does say, of course, there's going to be personal endpoints involved. It merely is starting off by saying, our marketplace has group video systems. They're not just about boardroom systems. There's a big segment in there about, where you might say Logitech would fit in terms of the peripherals. And I think Video talked about, sort of build your own type systems. So Simon, I'm in agreement with you on this, but I think that we just ought to be a little bit careful before we just slam it and say, there's just no basis here. They missed the boat.
Marty, hang on, Marty. Let me come in here. But what it seems to me is what you've said was the premise of the document was based on one thing, but they measured another one, and therefore what you read in the title isn't what you get in the document. And secondly, it seems to have allowed them to get out of talking about, let's be honest, the most exciting companies in the video conferencing space today, and those would have to be in no particular order: Pexip, Acano, Starleaf, Blue Jeans, Videxio, and Zoom. And they're 6 of the most interesting companies in the space today. You can't tell me that ZTE or Huawei or even Avaya make anything like the splash in the market that those 6 companies, all of which are excluded by their criteria. That makes no sense to me.
So I think you have to be careful. What they've done is they've said, what do our customers care about? So while there's lots of new entrants, and I can tell you, having been with video from when it started, video felt from a long time ago that it was, of course, a very exciting company and it should be in there. Until you achieve a certain level of success with the Gartner customer base, that's not what they're writing about. They do have cool vendors, and I bet you one or more of those vendors have been written up as a cool vendor in video conferencing.
Yeah,
So
but I think you're both, Marty, what you're saying is that they evaluated different criteria that's important, but the inclusion criteria to get in, and you're defending it, the inclusion criteria to get in was a certain level of revenue with their customers. But I think that's fundamentally flawed philosophically. And Simon just mentioned a bunch of vendors, but I'll throw in also Google Hangouts, right? And Google is clearly in the enterprise. They're doing a lot of stuff. And I'm not suggesting that Google Hangouts is a Magic Quadrant, should be a Magic Quadrant leader. But the flaw, I want to use Google as an illustration because they don't make any hardware at all. And they introduce, and there's a couple blog posts on it on Talking Pointz. They call it, what do they call it? Chromebox for meetings or something like that, and they don't sell that, right? They have other companies design and manufacture that. It's integrated into Calendar. It's designed to be a room system. It's designed to hook up to, I think it's 2 televisions and one camera or something like that. I don't remember all the details, but the point is that isn't even on this radar at all because they don't have $10 million of revenue, but they probably have aggregated users in the enterprise, aggregated revenue in one way or another that certainly qualifies them, and it's completely eliminated from this report. I think that's the disparity.
Right, and I don't really want to take the position that I want to defend Gartner. I just wanted to not have it go off to one side. So, I mean, you can argue the same thing for Microsoft and Link and their room systems, and clearly that's a major player in the Gartner space. So there must be a logic. I don't know. It wasn't that Robert Mason or Tom Eagle told me, okay, here's why we picked these.
They don't tell you that. But I'll say something that I think you'll definitely agree with, Marty, because from the video perspective, video's endpoints are, even though video sells them and produces them, puts them in a box and ships them, they're generally manufactured on off-the-shelf components. And there's even one that's made on a Nook. And one of the advantages of that is that it's lower cost because you're not doing custom manufacturing. You're effectively doing assembly. You're putting it together. You put it in a box. And as a result of that, your revenues in endpoint, even at the same number of devices of one of these other vendors that has a proprietary custom system, is going to be significantly lower. And additionally, your prices are going to be significantly lower. And that's not, they're counting, oh no, you have to have $10 million in revenue to count, not number of clients, not number of hours, not number, I mean, just with video alone, you've got, is it CERN, something like that, with 60,000 users, something like that, in one account.
Right. So I think that it's a bar as opposed to that's how you get scaled. I don't know. Like you said, they don't share the numbers. You do a Forrester wave and you see your numbers in every single, little category.
Yeah, right.
And in this, you don't. There's a certain amount of you share, you argue, you get, there's meetings and stuff like that, the whole process.
The Forrester numbers, why you're mad. The Google, right. the Gartner numbers, you have no idea why you're mad. But yeah.
Yeah. So I think the point that I want to make is that this is about a segment of the market. So I completely agree, Simon. It didn't cover everybody. It's not, I don't think it pretends to be, this is a comprehensive report on all video conferencing, all the ways you could get it. I think you have to step back and look at what does a vendor want out of it? And then it sort of gives you a feeling about, why was Smart in there? Of all the ones that are in there, I say, that fit the reason why you guys say this doesn't work, it's Smart, right? They only make a room system. And ZTE and Huawei, they're getting it because they've started to show traction in particular regions of the world.
That's the other thing. We didn't mention that this is a global report. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a global report.
Which is also
when you look at it from a vendor. Oh, go ahead. Okay.
Let me. You brought up Smart. I'd forgotten they're even in the list. And by the way, if you look on the Magic Quadrant, almost so did Gartner.
Right.
They're not. I mean, I've been in this video business for a long time, as we all have. Smart, fine company, very good data collaboration products. If you put video conferencing into a data collaboration product, you have a terrible video conferencing product and you've ruined your data collaboration product. Have them next to each other, not in the same box. It doesn't make any sense.
Right. So,
and I've struggled to believe that Smart has sold $10 million worth of video conferencing product. I mean, it depends how you define it, but
right.
even by their own criteria, I think that's bogus.
Well, they're the ones that would submit it to Gartner, and Gartner takes their word for it, right? I mean, they don't ask, they don't audit, right? The point that I wanted to make is, what does a vendor want when they're listed in this criteria? So I think if we go to the high level, you could see why maybe I'll defend it, is what does a vendor want? What is Gartner
in the top right-hand corner?
Yep.
Clearly you want to be a leader. And here's the thing. Gartner recommends when they talk to a client who asks a question, they never say, you should choose company X. What do?
They say
choose 3, right? What your objective is to be one of the top 3 that Gartner will offer up to a client to consider. And there are different reasons why clients choose one over another.
Right. So generally, what Gartner's MO is, if a client calls and says, we're looking for some sort of solution, the general default response is you should go out to bid with your incumbent vendor and the vendors in the leaders quadrant. And
right.
In this case, there's 3 vendors in the leaders quadrant: Cisco, Polycom, and Video. And what I want to echo is that, or maybe not echo, but what I want to make clear is that, and as Simon pointed out, is that there's several companies that probably should be in that consideration or leaders quadrant that they didn't identify because of that room system. And there's 2 companies in particular, but I'll start with one of them, which is Econo, which doesn't make room systems at all. And so Econo's got a very interesting solution. It's a very nice solution to interface with Link. It's a very nice solution with persistent messaging. They call it CoSpaces. It's getting a lot of traction. They're growing like gangbusters. They're selling it to carriers and getting it rebranded, et cetera, like that. But you don't have to buy it as a service. You can buy it as a product. And I've been actually doing a project recently where I've interviewed a couple of customers, and they were one of them had talked about the Econo model works so well because they were global and the licenses are concurrent models. They didn't have to buy licenses. Very compelling enterprise class solution that is completely missing from this list because of that criteria of the room.
Well, right. See, I would argue that this is a little bit, perhaps instead of a wooden wheel analogy, a better analogy is in the early 90s, people cared about what PC they had. By the mid to late 90s, it was all about the network you were on. And then later, it was about the services that you got over the internet. And I feel we're in that world. We're in a world where really the endpoint that you're interacting with the video experience on, whether it's a PC or a NUC or a Mac or an iPad or a room system, is to a greater extent every year irrelevant to the users. What matters is things like CoSpaces from Econo, or the sort of solutions that Pexip are offering, or people like Blue Jeans and Videxio and all these other. These are the ones. Zoom is a perfect example. These are the ones that are actually making a big difference in the market. Now, I'm just to be on the off chance I wasn't already a curmudgeon enough about this stuff. I would argue most big corporates use the Magic Quadrant as the get out of jail free card. So when the project doesn't go so well, the CIO can turn around and go, but look, Gartner said they were good. And I just feel that in this particular case, that they're measuring it by the wrong set of criteria. It just doesn't, hopefully they'll do one on companies in the services space.
It's the closest thing we have generally to a consumer reports type of model, right? There's, you go buy a car, you might read the consumer reports. That's your get out of jail card. I did my research. I got third-party validation on this car. And in the enterprise space, it's a little more complex. So there's no consumer reports in the enterprise space. And this is the closest thing we generally have. And it's a shame that they don't, unlike consumer reports, that actually drives the cars and gets records on maintenance and all that stuff, that Gartner doesn't really do that. It's based largely on the RFQ process that Marty talked about earlier, and based on their customer feedback that they're getting from their customers, which in the customer feedback part is inherently review. Inherently review. This is how it was a year ago. This is what we've been dealing with, and it's not necessarily looking about their roadmap. And so Gartner tries to balance all three of those factors, what the vendors tell them, what the vendors' roadmap is, and what the customers are telling them, but without actually trying the products. And the customers tend to lag the market.
See, I would argue, Dave, that this report, if you remember, up until, what was it, 4 or 5 years ago, Gartner wouldn't even touch the video conferencing industry. It was simply too small, too niche, no one was interested. And I forget what year, Marty, you'd know, because you probably wrote the report for video when they first did it, but some year in the last couple of years, 5 years perhaps, Gartner started paying attention to this market. The quadrant we have today and the report that they've written today would have been extraordinarily useful to major corporates, and I would argue that is the real space for Gartner, for major corporates 6, 7 years ago, maybe even 4 years ago. But today, there's some very nice, I'm not suggesting that I would disagree, by the way, with the shape or pattern that they've produced on their graph, but I just think it's odd. I just think it's odd. And I hope they do a backup with something else.
Right. So I agree with you, Simon, completely on that aspect, which is when we even pitched this, we were kind of surprised that it was just group systems. Dave brought up, Econo, which is really infrastructure. That was clearly where we were trying to pitch it. We completely agree that it's about, people have their own personal endpoints. One thing that you just have to recognize about Gartner is they have to be careful. It's sort of like they want to be conservative at some level.
They absolutely want to be conservative, right. And that's one of my biggest complaints about the Magic Quadrant in general.
Right.
Is when I think of, I've used this analogy before, but when I subscribe to a stock newsletter, the stock that I want them to recommend is the undiscovered stock that is got all the potential and all the that's the one to buy into, because the well-known big blue chips, they don't triple in value, and so that's what I look for an analyst in the stock market. When I go to the enterprise space, I'm kind of hoping I'm going to get that. These are the companies you should be looking at. These are the ones that are undiscovered. There's a lot of potential here, but they tend, the Magic Quadrants as a rule, tend to mirror market share reports. There's obviously some differences, but they tend to really closely align with market share reports. They tend to be very conservative. You have to prove that you're getting traction. You have to prove that your customers like you. And it's not so much about what customers should be looking at that they maybe haven't discovered.
So, there was a very telling quote in this report that I think gives you an insight into what Gartner values. I said earlier that Gartner calls customers. You get to supply, each vendor supplies the vendors, in addition to, of course, those they speak to who are their clients who have done inquiries with them. And in Avaya, they said, that the customer references were not positive about going forward with Avaya. I mean, that is death. And I think that was the point, is when you look at what Gartner is trying to do, if you can't give them references that are saying, we love these guys, we're going to be adding more room systems, more infrastructure, it says something about, has that time passed? That is the wooden wheel on the wagon.
I agree, Marty. I mean, look, everyone has a brother-in-law, right? Everyone has who's going to say something nice about. If Avaya can't find one person or 5 people who are going to say nice things about it, 5 even. How many fingers have I got? It's great. That's crazy. I mean, the reality is, and I really don't want to rip into Avaya too hard, although here we go. I mean, they couldn't spell video conferencing. They bought Radvision because seemed like a good idea at the time, and someone had whispered in their ear, we'll buy more via endpoint telephony if you do video. And then after they bought it, they went, oh no, you bought the wrong company, silly boys. And then the whole thing fell apart. I mean, it's madness.
Yeah.
Avaya's got way too much else going on. They're in a death struggle with Mitel, ShoreTel, Cisco, and Microsoft in their real business. They don't care about the video conferencing one.
Marty, when you said the telling quote, that was a telling quote. I'll give you that. But the quote that I thought you were going to read, the one that I highlighted, is this just on the first page. Gartner's ratings are based primarily on interactions with vendors and Gartner clients that have engaged vendors in the sales cycle. And I'm thinking to myself, why is that important, right? And the one that comes to mind there, and Simon mentioned them earlier, is Zoom. And so Zoom is a pretty easy cloud-based that you click and subscribe and you upgrade to the pro level and you get the service. And what they've taken the room system approach one step further than even video has. Video is using room-based general hardware that they've packaged. Zoom has got these what they call smart rooms, and it's a recipe. They tell you to go get a Mac Mini. They tell you to get an iPad. They have special software that loads on it. They say plug it into your TV. It plugs into your calendaring system and you have a room system. So they, again, just like Google, they have zero effectively room system hardware. They're using the Logitech cameras. They're using Revo Labs audio systems, and they have zero hardware, and they've assembled it themselves. And when I talk to Zoom about this, they tell me that the feedback they're getting is that their customers already have this stuff. They already had an old computer laying around that they turned into a room system. They already had a TV in the room, and they're just building this stuff up. So again, Gartner is kind of missing that mark, not only on the room system revenue, but on this requirement here, you have to be engaging with the sales cycle. Well, what if you don't need the sales cycle? What if you could just bypass the whole thing and just empower yourself?
Well, and I would argue, Dave, that is a fundamental shift. In fact, in some senses, more important than the shift from endpoints to infrastructure or infrastructure to SaaS is that the fundamental business plan of all the video conferencing manufacturers is changing, or they will go bust. So the idea of having, you've basically got three types of sales model. You've got sales-led, marketing-led, brand-led. Sales-led means very expensive sales guys go and individually sell deals, right? That would be Cisco, Polycom, lots of the existing manufacturers. But then when the price drops through the floor, then you have to move to marketing-led, where you end up with inside salespeople selling to customers over the phone. Video conferencing is very hard to sell over the phone. And then you've got the third model, which I would argue people like Blue Jeans and Zoom are doing a great job of, which is having your customers sell to your other customers on your behalf. And one of the best ways of doing that is the freemium model. And that means your cost of sale can drop through the floor. I mean, a Zoom account as an example, right, and I only say it because we're using it for today's call, is $100 a year. Well, I couldn't sell, if as a sales guy or anyone in a sales organization or a marketing-led organization could not sell a product at $100 a year, the cost of sale is probably 20 times that. So the opportunity to transform the business model as well as the technology is enormous. And I think that's something that the customers need to think about. Let's move away whether Gartner's right or not. We know they're wrong, and that's that. So let's talk about what customers want. And I think the customers want a freemium model. It's easier for them, and it's how they do so many other things in their lives.
All right. Well, in defense of Gartner, I will say that I know that on these Magic Quadrants, they do an extraordinary amount of work. I don't think any of us have suggested that this isn't a thorough and comprehensive report. We're questioning the criteria to get into the report, et cetera. But they do a reasonably good job. I guess my biggest concern about the Gartner report is that end users don't understand how to read these. They try to compare them year to year, and they year-to-year comparisons are very good in terms of relative positioning, but because a company moved up or down doesn't mean anything because the criteria changes, because the scale changes, the requirements change, all kinds of stuff. And so I don't think people really generally understand. They try to use these as a consumer reports, and they're not really written that way. And so they could be a little misleading. I think we should wrap up this video, but I just want to go around a little bit more. If there were any real big surprises on this, just to wrap that up, if you think that there was just anything that really stood out as a real big surprise, Simon, you want to go with that one?
Sure. So the first thing is, I would agree with you, Dave, that when you actually read the report, that the points they make about any of the manufacturers they mention actually do seem to be completely reasonable. We've already agreed that there's lots of people who should be in the report who aren't. It surprises me that Smart even makes the list, frankly, and there's nothing against Smart. They're a great product, but not in the video conferencing space, in my personal opinion. And, however we cut it, Gartner is an American/Western European organization. It's difficult to imagine why ZTE and Huawei, who are basically absent from those markets, certainly the US, really make it. I think it would be more interesting to cut some of those players out and put some different ones in. But having said that, the words they put about each of the major players, I would generally agree with.
Marty?
Well, I think we've covered the group video systems, and we all agree that group is much broader than having a room system as the primary. I'm hoping that as Gartner moves forward, and from having watched them over so many years, I think they will cover in some way, whether it's a market scope of service providers, that might be how they start, whether it's changing from group system to something else, going more broadly and adding vendors. I would certainly hope they do that. So I don't have a disagreement that really the set of players is probably broader. And just as you look at, in the unified communication space, there are so many more vendors on it. I think there are a lot of alternatives in the video conferencing space that approach it from different ways, go after different market segments. We didn't even talk about what I think is really an important one, which is the whole embedding of communication technology within other applications. So it's not just that it stands on its own, but that it's a part of something far broader. And that and by the way, there are enterprises that are building video communication into their applications that probably would talk to Gartner about who should I use.
But like a banking application, customer service application, things like that.
Right. I think we're going to, and it's, obviously healthcare, that I've talked a lot about. So I think that there's a lot of potential for Gartner. I think maybe that's a good thing. Maybe if we could do something here and maybe stimulate them a little bit to say, video communication is the richest form of communication. How do you look at that in a much broader way than just physical room systems? And I completely agree with Simon. That is so old. That was what we battled when we entered the market almost 8 years ago. The world is different, and it would be great for Gartner to see that its clients are also looking at the world in a more forward-looking way, and for Gartner to move.
Not so much their clients, but I believe that the vast majority of Gartner analysts looked at TalkingPointz videos for validation. So I think we're doing our job.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but Marty, you didn't answer the question. You talked to Simon threw you off. The question was, were there any big surprises that just came to you when you looked this up, when you looked at this report?
Well, I do think Smart being in it was just shocking relative to perhaps other players. And I think it would have been cool to have had Microsoft, which has a room system, and therefore an offering, and it would have broadened it. And the same thing with Google, like you said. These are major players selling into enterprise. It would have been interesting to see where they are in there, obviously with a different balance of what they offer, but are players. So it would have been, I think, a broader set might have worked better here.
Okay, you both picked on Smart, so I just want to defend Smart for a moment here, because Smart, you can see the board behind me, I got a Smart board there. They obviously make one of the best whiteboard type of technology solutions out there, very common in a number of environments and manufacturing architecture. But they're not really considered, what your point I think you're making, both of you, is that they're not really a room video system. I think they got in the category because of their Link room system, and of course their Gartner's audience with Link, a lot of enterprise drivers are around Link room systems. And of the Link room system solutions, I think Smart had one of the better ones. And that's how that board behind me is set up.
Right. So Dave, I think the issue, though, is that, yes, they make just an endpoint, but you can see from the report in almost all the vendors, it's about a broad set of things, which I thought was good of Gartner to say. It's about infrastructure. It's about personal endpoints. It's a broader set of things. So that's why I'm saying Smart truly is just an endpoint.
Yeah. You can't have it both ways, though. You can't have – the report is about endpoints in the title, then the report isn't about endpoints in the body of it, and then if it isn't about endpoints and it should be about infrastructure, then half the players who should be in it aren't then in it. I mean,
well, you had to have both.
You're just Australia. You're just so difficult. You're just stubborn.
Yes, I know. Aren't facts annoyingly stubborn things?
Yes. Otherwise, I think we've covered everything, and we can go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you, both of you, for participating, and thanks for tuning in.
Thank you very much, Dave. Thanks, Simon.
Cheers, guys.
Bye-bye.